They laughed at me during that family dinner. Their whispers and stares made it clear I didn't belong. Then years later, I sat across the same table, not as the ignored outsider, but as the one holding the keys to their entire legacy. My name is Leah Tran, and this is how my quiet control sparked their deepest regret. What happens when the person you tried to shame becomes the one who shapes your future? Before we dive into the story, let me learn a bit about you. If you're a charming lady, please leave the number 1 in the comments, and if you're a dashing gentleman, leave the number 2. This way, I can send you a special greeting. Now let's start the story together. They said it was just dinner, but that night carved a line I could never cross back over. I can still remember how their smiles hid the coldness beneath, like a thin veil barely covering the sharp edges of judgment. It was Thanksgiving of 2017, and Caroline Whitmore's lakefront estate in Seattle was buzzing with polite conversation, the clinking of glasses and the faint scent of roasted turkey and pumpkin pie. The house was grand and warm, yet the atmosphere felt heavy, weighed down by unspoken tensions I could feel pressing in from every direction. I was in my early 20s then, filled with hope and excitement about the new consulting startup I was launching. I had spent years working hard, earning my degree, and finally stepping out on my own. That night, I wanted to share my dreams with my husband Ethan's family, hoping for even a shred of encouragement. But Caroline, my domineering aunt-in-law, seemed to have other plans. As I spoke about the progress my company was making, her smile stayed fixed, but her eyes grew distant. With a subtle shift, she redirected the conversation to Greg Whitmore, my cousin-in-law, and his recent promotion within the family business, a real achievement in their eyes. Greg didn't hesitate to mock my work, dismissing it as a hobby at best, a careless jab that landed harder than he intended. I felt the weight of their disdain but kept my composure. Quietly, I excused myself from the table, the clatter of cutlery and laughter filling the spaces I left behind. Ethan followed me briefly, whispering, "Just try to fit in." His words were meant to comfort, but they only highlighted the gulf growing between me and his family. Days later, an email arrived from Caroline. The message was curt, telling me to skip future family strategy events. I read the words carefully, noticing how my name was written in lowercase, Leah, as if to erase my identity altogether. Alone in my apartment, the sting of that simple act underscored my invisibility. That night didn't break me. It planted something deeper, something waiting. I held on to that quiet resolve as I stared at the untouched wine glass from the dinner and the way I had held my fork a little tighter than usual. Those small details became symbols of a determination that no amount of cold smiles could freeze. In this life, rough days can weigh you down, but there's always room for grace if we remember to care for each other. And sometimes, the greatest strength comes not from fighting loudly, but from standing quietly, with a fire that refuses to go out. I didn't know then what the future held, but I knew this was only the beginning of a story far bigger than one dinner. Something was stirring, waiting to change everything. 6 years is a long time to be invisible, unless you choose to be. I remember that Christmas dinner, years after the Thanksgiving night that changed everything, when whispers floated around the table like a cold breeze. Family members exchanged knowing glances and hushed tones, talking about my little tech thing as if it were some insignificant hobby. They didn't realize that beneath that quiet exterior, I was building something far more powerful than their dismissive words could ever imagine. After that night in 2017, I threw myself into building LT Insight Holdings. Starting from a cramped co-working space with a single desk and a flickering lamp, I worked tirelessly, often late into the night. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I focused the company on corporate audits and logistics, areas that many overlooked but were the backbone of any thriving business. Slowly, my efforts paid off. By 2020, LT Insight Holdings had grown steadily, attracting clients across Seattle and beyond. I wasn't in the spotlight, and that was intentional. I used shell companies and subsidiary names to cloak my involvement, remaining a silent major client of Whitmore Logistics, the very company my in-laws prided themselves on. I watched from the shadows. David Kim became my trusted strategist during those years. A sharp mind with a keen eye for detail, he was the one who spotted inconsistencies in the data long before I did. His calm presence balanced my determination, and together we navigated the complex web of business and family politics. Ethan, my husband, drifted further away with each passing year. His silence was a quiet acceptance, or perhaps a protective distance. I wasn't sure which, but I learned that in this game, relying solely on others was a luxury I couldn't afford. One evening in late 2023, as rain tapped softly against the windows of our downtown Seattle office, an encrypted file landed in my inbox. The label was blunt and alarming. Miscellaneous expenses, $8 million 2023. David's message attached read simply, "You'll want to look at this before Q4 renewals." My heart raced as I opened the file, revealing a trail of falsified expenses and manipulated accounts. It was the smoking gun we needed. That moment marked the beginning of the end for Greg's carefully constructed facade. Their books were unraveling faster than their legacy, and I was quietly preparing to step back into a world that had once shut me out. But I wasn't ready to return just yet. There was still work to be done, secrets to uncover, and a foundation to strengthen. In this life, the most dangerous person is the one you never see coming. I had become that person, the ghost they ignored, the force they underestimated, and when the time was right, I would be waiting. Leah and David worked late into the night, poring over every detail, every irregularity. The office hummed with quiet intensity, a stark contrast to the laughter and clinking glasses of the Whitmore estate. The city lights flickered outside, but inside, a storm was gathering, a reckoning that no one could avoid. I glanced at my phone and saw a message from Ethan, simple and distant. "Hope you're doing okay." I didn't reply. Not yet, because some battles have to be fought alone before allies can be trusted. I wasn't ready to return yet, but their books were falling apart faster than their legacy, and soon they would have no choice but to face the truth. I didn't ask to be invited back, but when they did, I accepted with a smile. Caroline's old words echoed in my mind. Family legacy is earned, not granted. That phrase had stung me 6 years ago when she dismissed my ambitions, but tonight it rang with a different meaning. I was no longer the hopeful young woman who had been quietly sidelined. I was a force they had overlooked, and the power I wielded was about to shift the entire game. The annual Whitmore corporate holiday dinner took place in a sleek high-rise banquet hall overlooking Seattle's glittering skyline. It was December 2023. The city wrapped in the familiar chill of winter, with snowflakes teased by street lamps far below. Inside, the room buzzed with elegant chatter, the clinking of glasses and the aroma of roasted chestnuts mingling with fresh pine from the elaborate holiday decorations. I received the invitation a week prior. My name was printed on the formal card, but with a glaring error. Mrs. Ethan Whitmore, it said, but misspelled. A small slight, but one I noted with quiet satisfaction. It was a subtle reminder that to them, I was still just an appendage to my husband, not the woman who held the reins behind the scenes. Nevertheless, I arrived that evening dressed in a sleek navy jumpsuit, an intentional nod to the outfit I had worn to my MBA graduation years ago. The fabric hugged my frame with understated elegance, a quiet announcement that I had arrived on my own terms. Inside, familiar faces circled the room. Greg Whitmore, still wearing his signature smug grin, held court near the head table. Caroline's presence was taut, her gaze sharper and more calculating than I remembered. Natalie, Greg's sister, watched cautiously from a corner, while Ethan drifted unnoticed among the crowd, oblivious to the undercurrent swirling around us. David Kim, my trusted strategist, was mingling inconspicuously, a quiet shadow in the backdrop. Greg took to the stage to deliver a speech, his voice brimming with pride. "This year marks record growth for the Whitmore Group," he declared, eyes glinting with self-satisfaction. "And none of it would be possible without our Tier 1 client, LT Insight Holdings." The name landed heavily in the room, and I could see a flicker of confusion ripple through the crowd. They didn't yet know the full extent of what LT Insight Holdings represented. Caroline, ever the matriarch, glanced my way with a dismissive smirk, muttering under her breath, "At least Ethan brought someone quiet tonight." The words could have stung, but I let them slide, folding my hands calmly as I sipped my wine. I made no grand entrance or dramatic revelation that evening, observing how Greg and the family ran their empire with a careless confidence that blinded them to the cracks forming beneath the surface. Instead, I soaked in every glance, every whisper, every slight. The room laughed at my presence, dismissing me as they had for years. But beneath that laughter was a tension they could not see, an impending reckoning I carried silently within. As Greg raised his glass in a toast to family legacy, unaware that the real power at that table was quietly watching, I made a silent vow. This night was only the beginning. Soon they would be the ones begging for a meeting. Sometimes power doesn't announce itself with noise. It waits patiently, growing stronger in the shadows until the moment it must be reckoned with. And tonight, the shadows were long and I was ready. Some people use power to shout. I prefer spreadsheets. The day I walked into the Whitmore Group boardroom that rainy December morning in 2023, I knew that silence and numbers would be my loudest weapons. The city outside was cloaked in a soft drizzle, the gray sky mirroring the tension I felt inside. But I held my head high, stepping forward as the CEO of LT Insight Holdings, a name that had become a quiet force behind the scenes. Greg's mocking voice echoed in my mind, reminding me how no one ever took me seriously. That memory fueled my resolve as I set down my briefcase and clicked to the first slide of my presentation. The room fell quiet. Caroline sat rigid, her eyes narrowing, while Natalie shifted uneasily in her seat. Ethan, as always, remained quiet, his gaze flickering between us, unsure where he belonged in this unfolding storm. I presented detailed financial reports with deliberate calmness, revealing the cracks in Greg's empire. The numbers told a story of misconduct, forged expenses, inflated revenues, and hidden liabilities that threatened to unravel everything the Whitmore family had built. I could see the shock ripple across the boardroom like a silent wave. Murmurs spread as eyes darted over spreadsheets, each figure a nail in the coffin of Greg's facade. When I turned the screen to highlight a series of forged numbers linked directly to Greg's department, the air thickened. "Greg," I said, my voice steady and unyielding, "would you care to explain these discrepancies before the regulators do?" His confident mask faltered, sweat beaded on his brow as he scrambled for an answer. The board members leaned in, their faces etched with disbelief and concern. Throughout it all, I remained calm. Facts and data were my allies, far more powerful than raised voices or desperate accusations. The truth spoke louder than any rant ever could. Caroline's jaw tightened, and Natalie's worry deepened. Ethan's silence spoke volumes. The family fractures were laid bare before us. As I concluded the presentation, projecting the incriminating evidence one last time, I locked eyes with Greg. In that moment, the room understood. I was no longer invisible. I had become inevitable. They called me invisible. I became inevitable. Legacy is only powerful if it earns its place at the table. Those words echoed painfully in my mind as the tension in the boardroom thickened like the December fog outside. Caroline Whitmore's belief in blood over everything had ruled this family for generations, but tonight, that belief was about to face a reckoning. The air was heavy with anticipation and quiet whispers, legal counsels filling the room with their calm, calculated presence. Caroline approached me privately, her voice low but firm, trying to negotiate behind closed doors. "Leah, perhaps we can handle this quietly," she suggested, her eyes searching mine for a sign of weakness. But I refused. There would be no more private deals, no more silences to shield corruption. "No more closed doors," I said steadily, letting the weight of my words settle over the room. Greg, ever defiant, vehemently denied the accusations laid bare in the reports I presented. He tried to deflect, claiming mistakes and misunderstandings, but I had prepared for every excuse. I produced irrefutable audit trails, emails, transaction logs, internal memos, all painting a clear picture of financial misconduct. The room fell silent, the murmurs fading as reality set in. The board convened an emergency vote on whether to restructure the company or face inevitable collapse. I presented 2 sealed envelopes, options they couldn't ignore. The first outlined a plan for Greg's resignation and a full corporate restructuring under new leadership, ensuring the company's survival. The second was straightforward. I would walk away, handing over the findings to federal regulators and letting the consequences unfold. The tension was palpable as Caroline's trembling hands reached for the envelope. Reluctantly, with a sigh that carried the weight of centuries of family pride, she signed the restructuring agreement. Greg's resignation was sealed along with it. The power shift was undeniable. A Whitmore had signed her own retirement, and I didn't even have to raise my voice. Power, I realized then, often shifts silently but decisively. It doesn't need grand declarations or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it's the quiet certainty in one person's resolve that topples empires built on legacy and denial. As I watched Caroline step away from the table, the air felt different, charged with possibility and the promise of change. The family name still held weight, but it was no longer an unchallengeable shield. Tonight, the future belonged to those who earned it, not those who inherited it. They didn't lose to revenge. They lost to someone they refused to see. I sat in my new office, the soft hum of the city of Seattle sprawling beneath my window. The skyline stretched out before me, a tapestry of lights and shadows, and it felt like the perfect backdrop for this new chapter in my life. Early 2024 had brought more than just a new year. It had brought a new role, a new power, and a long-awaited closure. On my desk lay a simple piece of paper encased under glass, the rejection letter Caroline Whitmore had sent me back in 2017. I traced the faded words with my eyes, a cold dismissal that once felt like a wall, but now served as a reminder of how far I'd come. That letter, with my name written in lowercase, symbolized the past that no longer held me captive. My phone buzzed repeatedly, breaking my moment of reflection. Messages flooded in from Caroline, Greg, and Ethan, each carrying their own mix of regret, anger, and confusion. Caroline's message was terse, apologetic yet laced with bitterness. Greg's was defensive, a last grasp at pride lost. Ethan's, more personal, betrayed a silent questioning of the woman I had become. I took a deep breath and crafted a single response to the family group chat. "Don't worry about the Whitmore name. I'll protect what's left of it." It was neither a threat nor a boast, just a simple declaration of my place. Earned, not given. David stepped into the room, his usual calm presence grounding me. "Congratulations, Leah. The board officially selected you as transitional chair. They know you're the future this company needs." His words weren't just about a title. They acknowledged the quiet strength I had nurtured over the years. I looked out again at the city lights, feeling a peaceful resolve settle over me. I never needed permission or approval. What I needed was resolve, the kind that turns whispers of doubt into an undeniable truth. I built something undeniable, and now they have no choice but to recognize it. As I look back on this journey, I realize that true strength doesn't come from power or revenge, but from the quiet resilience to keep moving forward. In life, if we learn to listen with compassion and hold space for those around us, even the deepest wounds can begin to heal. Family isn't just about blood, it's about the grace we extend, the patience we practice, and the love we choose to nurture every day. If this story touched something within you, I invite you to share your thoughts or experiences. Together, we can keep these conversations alive and continue finding hope in unexpected places.